Welcome into the lounge presented by DraftKings. I'm Ryan Mink here with Garrett Downing, and we are thrilled to sit down with Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta. And Eric, one thing we hate to do on this podcast is toot our own horn. We loathe doing that. But I, in full transparency, I do have to let you know that Malachi Starks was my mock draft pick. And you're probably thinking, a lot of guys pick Malachi. This wasn't exactly a giraffe, stick your neck out kind of thing. But I planted my flag on February 13th. I have the receipts. A few days after the Super Bowl, I said, Malachi's my guy, right? So my question to you is, how early was Malachi the Ravens guy? Like, when did he first pique your interest?
Yeah, I think, Ryan, first of all, they don't become our guy until they become our guy. Right. Like, literally, we're on the clock, and that's our guy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We have a lot of guys that are our guys.
Yeah.
But I think that's a player that the scouts really liked throughout the process. Joey Cleary, Andrew, Raphael, Kevin Waddle, those guys went in there to Georgia early and just came back with rave reviews, professionalism, coachability, ball skills, toughness, tackling, instincts. Just, kind of ran the gamut of every box to check off was Malachi, and he became a guy that throughout the process we just said, you know what, if this guy's there, this guy would be a great pick.
Yeah. Is there a process, Malachi had a fantastic interception in like his fourth play. It was his first game in college. Are there guys that down the road, eventually they're going to be in the draft but they catch your attention as freshmen? You're like, when that guy comes out, like, we're going to have to take a good hard look at that guy.
Yeah, that's a great question. And sometimes those guys end up being every bit as good as they looked as freshmen.
Right.
Sometimes they even become better. But I'll tell you, every once in a while, you'll watch a guy that's a senior and you'll say, you know what, this guy was a beast as a freshman. And you'll look at him and go, you know what, he's not that good.
Right.
And some of that, sometimes that's scheme change. Sometimes that's they peaked early. Injuries are a factor, different things like that.
Yeah.
But that happens with certain guys. And, so I used to, back in the day when we could make little bets, which can't do that anymore, but back in the day, there was a guy, this is going back 50 and 20 years. There was a guy that I saw that played in the Pac-10 as a freshman, and I was watching somebody else.
Yeah.
I might have been watching Haloti Nada. That tells you how far back it was.
Right.
But I saw a guy and I go, wow, that guy's going to be a first-round pick someday. He was a freshman. So I put it on Joe Ortiz's board, and this guy's name was up there for like 4 years. Well, 4 years later, I'm looking at that name going, why is that up there? And Joe's like, well, that was your guy. And I'm like, that guy's terrible.
That was not Malachi. Malachi continued to get better.
Yeah. He kept getting better. I'm curious, you made the point after the draft, you picked him that he was the highest rated player on the board when you were on there at 27.
By far,
yeah. Can you give any indication of just how high he was on our board?
Well, we picked, 27?
Yeah. And
he was much higher than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, then that happens a lot in the first round. We talk about the word I use is slippage, which is just basically players outside your range that get drafted. So anytime that happens, it's great because it pushes down one of your players. And so for us at 27, we have our list, 1, 2, 27. And, the quarterbacks may be in there, so that means you need more than 27 because you're probably not going to draft a quarterback with the first pick if you're the Ravens. So you need more than 27 players. You need 29 players if you have 2 first-round quarterbacks. So you got 29 players. Well, anytime a player is drafted outside your range of 29, you're like high-fiving because that's going to make it easier for one of your higher-rated guys in 29 and above to make it to you. So Malachi was pretty darn high.
It seems like the league just doesn't understand the value of safeties to a certain extent. I mean, we saw that with Kyle Hamilton when he gets to us at 14 and ends up being like a great player. And hopefully that's the same case with Malachi, and he ends up falling into that category of a slippage situation where he's there and probably has no business being there at 27. Do you agree with that? Like, does the NFL not value safeties, or do we value safeties more? What's your view on that?
I think there are definitely premium positions. Some people may or may not put safeties in that group of premium positions. I think one of my philosophies, and this is going back many years, is that, going back to like Todd Heap, Ed Reed, when you get the number one player at his position in any given draft class, you're getting a damn good football player. And so for us, getting a number one player at a position that maybe some don't think is a premium position, if that guy has a chance to be an impact player for you, then you should take him. So it's like, it comes down to like, would you rather take the sixth best offensive lineman in a draft because you have a need on the offensive line, or the fourth best receiver because you have a need at receiver, or the best safety, or the best inside linebacker? There's not really a right or wrong answer. I'm just saying that's a discussion that people would have.
Right.
And so for me, looking at it, if you got the best guy at his position in the draft and he's going to come in and play for you right away, and you think he's a difference maker, that's exciting.
Well, and the nice part is last season, 2 premium positions at the top with cornerback and offensive tackle with Wiggins and then Rosengarten, and they turned out to be arguably the best at their position anyway, even though they weren't the first picked. They were right up there with the top guys drafted at those premium positions. So that kind of frees you up to, all right, now we're going to get the best guy at different positions because we checked those boxes at premium positions this year.
And the other point, too, I think, is so if you imagine like you've got a bunch of buckets, and in every bucket, your mentality is going to be, you have all these players, they're all graded closely together, right? And then you're going to take the premium position guys and probably move them up a little bit because they play premium position. Right. Except that you're also going to weigh how clean is the player, right? So you get a guy that is super smart. He's been productive. He's extremely durable. He's been a team captain, or incredible interview and all that stuff, versus the other guys in the bucket that maybe aren't as productive, or maybe have some injuries, or maybe don't test that well, whatever it might be. So with Malachi, you're truly looking at the best player at his position, and probably, when it all comes right down to it, maybe, arguably, the cleanest player at his position. Literally no questions whatsoever. There were some other really good players that were there when we picked. And like, for instance, Josh Simmons, Ohio State, tremendously talented, probably the best feet in the draft, coming off a patellar injury. So that just, in some ways, just slightly muddies the water. That's a great player, Josh Simmons.
Right.
They got a great player. The Chiefs got a great player with a lot of upside.
Don't probably like seeing the Chiefs get him.
I know. Probably going to be a Pro Bowl player at some point.
Right.
But he suffered a serious knee injury. So you have to, everything matters when you're evaluating these guys, and you're really trying to separate. And so for us, Malachi, it was like, what can't this guy do? He's going to play for us right away. He's smart. He's tough. He's a ball hawk. He tackles well. Instinctual. Great kid. Winning program. SEC. Like every box, literally. If there were 20 boxes, he checked off all 20 boxes.
Yeah, exactly. Now you mentioned the name Ed Reed, and look, I don't want to fit him for a gold jacket before he's played an NFL game, right? And I know we don't want to overhype kids, but part of the reason way back when that I was like, this guy's my guy, and he looks like a Raven to me, is like I saw some shades. The way he goes up in his ball skills and makes plays on the ball, I was like, I've seen this before. You've been here a long time. You were here with Ed. Do you see any shades of 20 in Malachi?
Well, I don't want to put that on anybody. I mean, Ed probably, I don't like to say I have favorites like my kids. Like, I don't have favorites. I don't have a favorite dog. I don't have any favorite kids. But Ed, for me, one of my very favorites.
Yeah.
I probably got 3 favorite Ravens over the years. Ed's one of the 3. That gives everybody else a chance to be in the top 3. But Ed's one of my top 3.
Yeah.
So, I'm not gonna put anybody up there with Ed.
Yeah.
I think Malachi on his own, he's an awesome player. Excited about him, very excited about him. This draft gave me, particularly the first round, I had a lot of anxiety in the first round this year. Last year, not as much. It's been a few years, even like the Zay draft, not as much. This year, there were a lot of potholes along the way with the players in this draft in the first round. It's a very, very flat draft, so you had players in that just sort of dropped, and then it was flat for a long time. So I was nervous about this draft, and if people would have asked me, I would have said, one of the best possible outcomes would be Malachi being there, and he was. And so from that standpoint, there was tremendous relief for me at the end of that first round.
Did you think the Falcons traded up right ahead of us? They ended up taking Xavier Watts in the third round with their next picks. So they took James Pierce Jr. When Atlanta, who had a safety need, traded up right in front of us, were you sweating thinking they might take Malachi?
Not really. I still felt like that because Atlanta's got some safety talent.
Yeah.
I just felt like they were going to come up and get another edge player, another
Gotcha.
front seven player. I wasn't too worried about Atlanta. I was more worried about some of the other teams behind us, the Commanders, the Bills, teams like that.
Gotcha.
John Harbaugh said in the press conference that night after drafting Malachi that you guys talked after the season about the types of players you wanted to bring in, the mindset of guys who you wanted to add to this team. How did Malachi fit that? And I'm just curious, was that a specific conversation, or was that part of when you lay out the blueprint for the offseason, you and John and Steve and the front office and everybody, was there a vision for the types of players that you wanted to add to the team?
I just feel like when you look at some of our best players, they just wired a certain way. They're very mature, minded, smart, accountable, self-sufficient, dependable. I mean, those are some qualities, growth mindset, always working to get better, working on their weaknesses, gritty, tough, physical guys. And, Malachi was just one of those guys. And so, we go through and we scrutinize everything. And it might just be one thing. You might have seen one thing at practice. Maybe there was one rep in practice where the guy goes to the back of the line and some scout brings it up. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to say, well, what does that mean? What do they say about him? How does he practice? Those kind of things. And oftentimes it means nothing. But we approach it like it means everything at first. We go through every little thing. If one source has one concern, we're going to investigate it. If, one hand is 10 inches and his other hand is 9 inches, we're going to say, and that happens sometimes, not usually to that extent, but we're going to say, well, why is one hand bigger than the other hand? Is he injured? Does he have a bad finger? Or did we measure it wrong? Whatever that might be. We're going to look at every little question that we have and try to eliminate those questions as much as we can. And it may be, hey, go back to the school, talk to somebody else, get more information. Mm-hmm. It's very much like being, an investigative journalist or something, and you have your editor telling you, we don't have enough information, we don't have enough sources, talk to somebody else. Mm-hmm, That's kind of what we do as scouts. And we just keep probing and pushing and answering questions and getting more information to help us at the end of the process.
You said that Malachi had one of the most impressive combine interviews that you've ever been a part of. How rare is his intelligence and knowledge of the game for how young he is?
Well, one of the things we do is we have our giraffe conduct interviews. And, the giraffe has been around since 2008 in the draft room, and he's never been more impressed.
Has the giraffe been there since 2008?
The giraffe has been in the draft room since 2008. Now, this year, the giraffe got promoted.
Oh, he got the prime spot for the TV
He
cameras.
did, and he was getting a lot of coverage this year. Now, in past years, he's been in the corner. Right. But he got promoted this year to VP. We make a lot of people VPs around here. And VP of animal scouting.
Of animal scouting.
Well, what's the real question here is what's Malachi's sign?
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
He's a Libra.
Okay, you had to make sure that crossed the list.
I don't know what it is.
That was one of the boxes.
He was too good. It didn't really make any difference.
So in the second round, you get Mike Green. And if I had told you at the start of the draft that you would get him in the second round, would you have thought that was a possibility?
Probably not. I mean, let's face it. There were allegations made that on Mike that he had to answer to and work that teams had to do, and we knew that going in. It wasn't like in the fall we didn't know that there were some issues with Mike, and but as a player, watching him as a player, one of my favorite players this year. I think we do have a good idea what it takes to rush the passer. in the NFL. And we've had a lot of really good players over the years as pass rushers. And Mike is just well-schooled. His technique, he's got a variety of moves, explosive off the football, tenacious player. He's stronger than he looks. I mean, this is a guy who can knock you back and set the edge and do those kind of things. He can drop and play in space. He's lightning quick on the backside, knifing down. He can beat tackles. He can do anything you want a guy to do. He can do it. And so, it wasn't like we weren't surprised by how good he was, because starting out in September of last year, he was one of the top-rated players on our board. And so we spent...
Even before he played the season.
Well, as we got into the season,
Yeah.
his tape was just so impressive that we got as much information as we could. We talked to as many people as we could. We sent in multiple area scouts. We got information from Virginia. We got information from Marshall. We talked to people in his hometown. I mean, we basically did as much as we could. And in the end, we made the decision to pick him. And we're excited about him as a player. We think he's going to flourish here with us. We think we have a great scheme for him to be his very best. And we think he's going to have a great career with us.
He led the nation with 17 sacks this past season. He just blew up, that last year. And he had a good year before that too. But what do you feel like because he has obviously the moves like you were talking about, and he has the athleticism, the explosion. What kind of came together for him this last season when you were looking at him?
I just think maturity. You know, guys develop at different paces. We see it with our own guys, right? Why does a player not do much for 2 years and then all of a sudden make the Pro Bowl, right? We've seen that happen. So guys, it just takes everybody different amount of time. Some guys come in right away, boom. Other guys develop along the way, 2, 3, 4 years. So I think with Mike, he just really kind of hit his stride this year. He developed his game, strategy of rushing the passer, which, rushing the passer does require a strategy. It requires a game plan. It's like chess. It's not necessarily like playing offensive line or playing corner. You are trying to set your opponent up to beat him. And I think for Mike, it really just kind of all came together this year and clicked.
You talked about just believing that he could have a great career both this year and beyond. What do you view for him this season? Like, you've had a lot of pass rushers who've had success, some immediately when you go back through this franchise's history. What do you think he has in store for this year, and what does the ceiling look like for him?
Well, we're blessed. I mean, I think, there are some people that might say, well, the Ravens don't have a true number one pass rusher. And yet, I think we finished second last year in the league in sacks. And our whole room is back. So you look at Kyle Van Noy and what he's done in 2 seasons. A great player. Plays like a Raven. Tough, smart, polished. Rushes the passer. Can do all the different things. He's a leader. Odafe, double-digit sacks last year, right? Just continues to grow every single year. Having a great offseason. Expect huge things from him. Tavius is another guy. Tavius was a 4th-round pick, and he's like a real physical. He's a Raven. I mean, the way that guy plays, he fits us. Ajabo has overcome injuries. Still a very, very talented player. He's so hungry right now. I expect big things from him. It's right there for him. And then Adisa last year. So Adisa comes in. He's one of our higher players that we rated in the 3rd round. We get him last year. Had some soft tissue things, had some injuries, kind of had his first season derailed a little bit by that. But again, Adisa, when you think about that, it's like getting an additional draft pick this year. And then you take Mike Green, you put him in the mix. We got 6 really good, intriguing football players at Sam and rush linebacker.
Moving on to the 3rd round, Emory Jones Jr., he played right tackle at LSU. There's talk about sliding in the guard, and he can certainly compete to be our swing tackle and also compete at guard. When you were watching his tape, do you ultimately believe kind of like an Ekleche Osemele kind of mold, that guard ultimately will be his best position?
I mean, I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got good length, arm length. He's physical. He's got good feet. His game, certainly I would say, like most of our picks, needs some refinement. Mm-hmm. But like watching Emery at the Senior Bowl and watching his physicality, that to me tells you that he's going to be an excellent NFL offensive lineman. Whether it's right tackle, left tackle, guard, doesn't really matter. He's got the strength, the competitiveness, the quickness, the feet, the body, the frame, the experience, all those things to be a starting offensive lineman. And like honestly, when you watch him finish plays, that's a separator for me. You're looking at, like, say you got, 15 or 20, 25 offensive linemen that you have as draftable players in this draft. When you really look at his competitiveness and his physicality and his ability to finish, that puts him, for me, in the top 25% of all the offensive linemen in this draft class.
How do you, when you're evaluating players, how do you assess whether you think, for him as an example, he's been a right tackle, but maybe you think he could come in and compete at left guard? Like, how are you making that assessment during the draft evaluation process?
Well, I think you have to look at the qualities that make successful guards. And so you got to have some strength, ability to anchor, body type. It's hard, generally speaking, in my opinion, to be a 6'8" offensive guard, because you're going to be linear. You're going to have a linear body. You want some guys that have a base, we call it an ass, that that have some leverage and ability to stay low and play. Because that, when you play guard, guys are getting into your chest quickly, right? So you got to have an anchor to you. You can't just be getting blown back into the backfield. So there are some tackles who can't play guard. The other thing is, to play guard, you got to be smart, because things happen so quickly. There's always going to be stunts in games, and guys are jumping in gaps and things. So as a player, as a guard, you've got to be able to process more quickly than you might as a tackle. So for me, when I think of tackles, I'm thinking of corners, and I'm thinking of guards, I'm thinking of safeties. Safeties probably need to be more instinctive than corners. Corners, it's like you cover that guy. Yeah. Tackles is more like you're going to block that guy. When you play guard, things are happening so quickly. Guys are stunting. Guys are jumping down in gaps and things like that. So I think intelligence is, again, important. And then the final piece is just physicality, right? Playing like a Raven. We're a physical, downhill running team. We want guys that get off the ball, trying to push guys off the ball, latching on to guys, running their feet, and finishing with intent. And I think Emery can do that.
You talk about like finishing the play, and it really felt like throughout this year's draft class that the way in which guys play the game really jumped off the tape with almost all of our picks, right? Like it was that fierceness, that way they finished, and all those things. And Teddy Buchanan seems like a great example of that, as just like playing like his hair's on fire and he's all over the field. Was that a big thing that, like, when you're watching the tape and when you were watching it on Teddy specifically, that you just can pretty quickly say, oh yeah, that guy plays the game the way that we want our players to play?
Yeah, so I say, when I talk about that, it's like I want to see something. I saw an interview one time with an art gallery owner, and she was talking about an artist that she decided to buy his art, and it like just this artist took off, and they asked her, like, what did you see? And she had a hard time answering the question other than saying, I saw something. And that sometimes is all it takes with players. Like, I can't always tell you exactly what it is that I love about the player, but I saw something. It's like an energy that you see. It's the way they move. It's the way they strike. It's the way they finish. It's the tools they have. It's the upside potential. It's what are they going to do right away. It's they're getting beat 44-0 in the fourth quarter, and the guy's making every play. It's the fact that he's playing defensive end, and he's passing safeties and corners in pursuit. It's the lineman that, like, after the play, you see him get another shot. It's the running back that is getting hit at the line of scrimmage and gains another 2 yards every time. So you're looking at his average, and he's gaining 2 yards a carry, but he's literally getting hit at the line of scrimmage every time. It's like the most misleading 2 yards you'll ever see.
Right.
Those are the things that scouts sometimes that we look for. They're hard to measure, they're hard to quantify, but when you see it, it resonates.
Have you tried to put science behind that? Because like when you see something in a player, Ozzy may see a different something, like when you're looking for that something, or John may see a different something, and your scouts may see. And so it's like quantifying that magic quality that you're kind of talking about, I assume is just really challenging. Have you tried with analytics and everything that you do in this process to like put science behind that thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, and we do, and we use the chip, and we use some other services that we subscribe to that measure things like movement and balance and acceleration and deceleration and things like that. One of the things we do that I'm sure other teams might do, we do it in camp, we do it in June, is sometimes just watch a player. And I'll just point out things, especially with the younger guys. Like, what do you guys see in this play? And then I'll let them all kind of throw something out, right? And then I'll say, well, you're all missing this one thing. Look at, this is what I see. Okay, this is what I see. And look at how he gets bull rushed and doesn't give up any ground, right? Or look at this, you guys are telling me that he's not fast, and yet he's running by a corner on this play who runs a 4.4. You tell me he's not fast. How's he doing that? There's something going on here, right? Those are the things. It's not just watching a guy's target tape as a receiver and watching all 60 catches and saying, oh, he looks like an inside slot receiver. It's what does he do differently than everybody else? Maybe it's the way he catches the ball, right? Maybe it's he's got incredible coordination near the sideline. He always makes the tough catch near the sideline and gets both feet down, right? Maybe it's that. But it's what makes this player stand out, and it's not always the most obvious things. It might be something like, for instance, say it's a 4th and 20, right? And the quarterback just throws the ball downfield, and the safety probably has a really good chance to intercept the pass, but instead he knocks it down because he knows they're going to get the ball and the 40-yard line rather than the 20-yard line. It's all the little nuanced things that kind of go into it, and I think the best scouts are able to parse those things out and use those little glimpses of that player to evaluate the player the right way.
Right. Carson Vincent, you remained loyal to Alabama A&M. And I remember you talking about Zay Flowers and how he remained loyal to Boston College when he had NIL offers and he could have gotten money to go elsewhere. And that resonated with you. With Carson, him staying with Alabama A&M, did that also show you something, especially in this age of NIL and paid for play and all that stuff? Like, did that show you something?
And I think anyone who knows me knows how I feel about loyalty, right? And, for me, I've said this 1,000 times, probably on this podcast, but growing up in Boston in the 80s and seeing all my favorite players, Larry Bird, Jim Rice, guys like that, playing with one team, that's like a beautiful thing, right? Like just that idea. Even in my career, myself having been here now, this is my 30th year. So I value loyalty. And when I see players that exhibit that, to me, loyalty, humility, respect for others, those are the qualities you want in a great teammate. And so if you have that, you have something. And those kind of qualities make you a better player. So you could be a good player, but if you've got humility and loyalty, you'll be a better player. And so for me, that's something I really value.
You've gone more big school in your time as GM rather than the smaller schools, and Vincent falls into the small school category, HBCU. I think he's your first non-FBS pick, I believe. But what was it about him that made you feel like he's worth taking that shot on and giving him an opportunity?
I just think traits. You know, we had a chance to see him a few times at the Senior Bowl. I studied him at length. He came to Baltimore. We visited with him. George Warhop, really liked him. You know, we had a period where, you know, I think, you know, maybe back in like 2006, we realized everybody was kind of scouting the same players, and we felt like small school players were really an opportunity for us to exploit. And then we had a period of time where we took guys like Webby and Flacco, and I mean, we had a whole bunch of guys,
Brandon Williams,
right?
yeah.
All those guys. We
Yeah.
went through that whole stretch where we took a lot of those guys, and a lot of the guys ended up really good. Some guys didn't. You know, we had some failures too, but we hit on some guys. And then I think with COVID, when COVID hit, we did a lot of work trying to figure out, like, we understood what COVID was going to mean for scouting. And there were different things that were going to be greatly affected. One, of course, which was no testing. You know, we weren't going to know how fast these guys were. We weren't going to know a lot about these players. So we had to find ways to account for that. And I think with the analytics and, you know, David McDonald and Derek Yam specifically, and James Onsi, and, you know, they did some amazing things to help us get more information. But then the other idea was basically like, smaller season, right? Shorter season. Guys weren't going to play as many games, maybe no games. And that for us, the acclimation of basically no football or reduced football, it made all the sense in the world to take big school guys. So during COVID, if you really go back to that, what was it, 2020 draft? All big school guys.
Yeah.
Biggest of big school guys. You know, LSU, Ohio State, you know, Texas A&M, like Texas. We just took as many big school guys as we could. And we've kind of been doing that. You know, I do think that these guys that play at these bigger schools are probably, just generally speaking, ready to play faster, because it's almost like a pro program. Now they're getting paid. The bigger schools are paying more. So it's just like almost like you are able to go down and just pluck a guy from a big school, a big football powerhouse, and they come in, and the transition is at a much faster pace, which is what we're all about. As a team that wants to develop, the faster we can develop these guys, right, the faster they can play, the faster they can help us win games, because generally speaking, you only get a guy for 4 years before you're talking about either re-signing him or he's going to leave in free agency. So you really want to maximize that window of 4 years and get him on the field as quickly as possible.
Right. This draft, in some ways, reminded me a little bit on day 3 of the 2022 class, when you had all the 4th round picks. And this year you had this cluster of 6th round picks. And hey, like, I hope it hits like the 2022 class.
Just want to increase the challenge. You did well in the 2022.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's make it tougher. Let's do it in the 6th round.
Let's run that back again. That worked out pretty darn well, that 4th round. How did you approach this year's 6th round? Because I remember when you were talking about that 4th round, you're like, that's going to kind of define our draft, right? And we hit Isaiah Likely, we hit Faalele, you know, we hit Charlie, like a bunch of guys. How did you look at this year's cluster of 6th round picks? Did you have kind of a similar outlook on that cluster?
I think, you know, it wasn't intentional. I mean, I think the year we did the 4th round was pretty intentional. Yeah. In general, with the 4th round, you're going to hit on about 20% of your picks.
Starter rate,
real contributors, like real guys that really come in and contribute. 20 to 25% would be good. And so we were like, okay, can we get 3 guys out of that clump to really be contributors for us? Obviously, 6th round, the percentages are lower. Right. You know, I mean, you're talking like 12 to 15% of those guys end up really being strong contributors for your team. So the challenge is set. Like, we go into it knowing that the odds are probably stacked against us, but we swung, and we took some really good football players, and excited about really all those guys. I mean, those 2 corners were guys that I looked at a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, I saw them differently, but the same, really good players. Guys that had they gone the 4th round, you'd have been like, that's a good pick. And both corners, very athletic guys. One, you know, Kone's taller. Longerbeam's a little shorter. But Longer Beam is a great off-man player, ball skills, ball hawk tough. Kone, I think, has got a prototypical press corner size and speed ratio. So we think both of those guys are really, really good prospects for us. I think Wester, is another guy. So we talked to Chris Horton and said, Chris, rank these guys. Who are the best returners?
Mm-hmm.
And he came back with Wester as being one of the very best. And so we watched his returns, impressive. Watched him as a receiver, looked at his production, very impressive. Mm-hmm. And I think it's when you see a guy, and I call this the Addison phenomenon. Like Jordan Addison had been at Pitt as a receiver and had like great production, like basically like I don't know how many catches, but 80 catches a year at Pitt, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes to USC. It's hard to go to a new school, right? Think about when we were freshmen in high school. Think about when we were freshmen in college, right? There's an acclimation. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to USC first year and has an amazing season at USC. So when I look at Wester, I see the same kind of thing.
Right.
I see a first-year player at Colorado who goes there and has a great season. He's a talented receiver, excellent return man. I'm excited about him. We've had great success with South Florida players, and very excited about him.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the strategy on. I mean, I even asked you before the draft. You have 11 picks. Do you expect to use all 11 picks? And because 11 rookies making the team is going to be challenging, especially when you have all the 6-round picks. And so I'm just interested in the strategy of that, of keeping all of those picks rather than trying to move up in the second or the third round. Like, what was the thought process on keeping those picks and going that route?
Well, I could talk about that for 20 days. I think that, in our research, if you've ever done any kind of bias study, one of the most pervasive biases, I would say, is consensus bias. And it's just basically the idea that everybody is seeing things like you see things, right? Which you just can't believe that people wouldn't see it like you see it. We see that in all walks of life, right? Opinions on various things. You might think a TV show is insane and you're at a dinner party going, it's the best show in the world, and someone else goes, I hated it. Yeah. But you can't imagine that they would hate it. You would just assume that they like it because you like it. That happens with the draft every year. And years ago, there was really, for me, an important study called The Loser's Curse by Richard Thaler, who's a economist, and Cade Massey, who's a professor at Penn now. And the idea of it basically is that teams simply don't do any better drafting than anyone else. You're all going to be about the same, right? So the idea that you're going to trade up, and basically that the draft is inherently sort of a luck-driven process. Now, I don't believe that, but there is an element of luck involved. So if you think about that and if you accept that premise, then you're trading up for a player that you think is better than anyone else, right? And you think that team's going to draft him.
Right.
But most of the time, they're not going to draft that player. And so what we've seen over the years is that player is probably going to fall to you. And could he be selected? Yes. But there's no guarantees that player is going to be better than the player that you end up getting.
Yeah.
So they call it the loser's curse because the team at the top, it's like, oh, he's got the first pick in the draft. Well, you know what? The player that they select, we've seen this many times. There's no guarantees that player is going to be better than the player that gets selected at 25 or 30 in the first round. And so all things being equal, I know I'm doing a lot of talking about this, but it's a passion of mine.
It's fascinating.
All things being equal, right? The fact that no one really knows who's going to be better than anyone else, the only rational approach is to get more at-bats,
right?
Is to pick more. And so what we've seen over the last 5 years, but especially this year, everyone seems to be drafting players, the same players, So it's like going to a restaurant with 20 of your best friends, and there's 20 things on the menu, but all 20 of you are ordering one of the same 3 entrees, right? You're all getting the steak and you're all getting the pasta. Maybe a few guys are getting the crab cakes, but nobody's going after the vegetarian option,
Right.
and nobody's getting the lamb. Everybody's eating the same things. That's kind of what the draft has become in some ways. And I don't know if that's because of the incredible media coverage, all the so-called draft experts, right? All the people that are putting up mock drafts and consensus boards and things like that. But for me, the idea of having more picks means I have the chance of getting more players. If I have the chance of getting more players, then I have a better chance of finding more players that can play than my opponents. And so that's why we do it.
So I feel like we're always in the business of, if the league is zigging, we're zagging, right? And so when you see teams all ordering the same thing off the menu, you're saying that having more picks is like you ordering the salad, right? Like you're ordering something different from them. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, it just means that I can order more appetizers.
That's always a good idea.
I got more food on the table.
Right.
And so if I have more food on the table, there's a better chance I'm going to find something that I like.
Yeah.
Because I might order that steak or I might order that pasta
Right.
or that crab cake, but I might not like it.
Right. I got you.
So if I can order more food, then I'm going to leave and make sure I'm not hungry. I'm going to have enough to eat.
Yeah. Because everybody else is fighting over that steak and everything.
Which they may not like.
Right. Exactly.
It's not
right.
cooked well enough.
Right. It might be well done.
Yeah.
So to kind of go a little further down the analytics rabbit hole here, because it is fascinating stuff. You talked about the trade that you made, going back in the 4th round, 5 spots, to go up in the 6th round for 5 spots. And that gave you more picks in quick succession in the 6th round. And I was trying to read between the lines during the press conference on this, and it felt like what you were saying you wanted to do was you were going to draft a kicker, and you wanted to be in that sweet spot where you felt like kickers were going to be drafted, and you didn't want to get the 3rd kicker. You didn't want to have the top 2 kickers go, and then you're going with the 3rd guy. Am I reading that correctly? Like, can you take us inside that
Yeah.
logic?
So that was really, I'll tell you, honestly, I just made all that up. Okay. I was like, I made all that up.
Well, I ate it up. Just
Yeah, I mean, and people are still trying to figure that out. I just imagine like all these people going, what did he say? And, he said 4 or 5 different things, and none of those things really make sense.
Okay.
The reality of it was there were really 2 reasons why we made that trade. One, they had just brought out the buffalo chicken dip, and I really wasn't. I wasn't in a mind frame to pick because I wanted to get some of that buffalo chicken dip, and I knew that George Kokinis and Mark Acevedo were going to be out there eating that dip, and
Gotta watch George.
that was part. And the second one was just, and this happens every once in a while. This happened back when we drafted Flacco, but Chad Steele was in the bathroom at the time, and we couldn't make a pick without Chad being in there, so we had to. I mean, basically, that trade was like a timeout.
Gotcha.
That's all it was. I mean, it really
For Chad to get out of the bathroom.
Right.
Yeah,
You're knocking on the door. Chad, what's going on in there?
What that trade was like a timeout, but we didn't have any timeouts, so we faked an injury. That's what that was.
Didn't they make that a penalty now?
Yeah, but you got to catch them. And so that's what that trade was. Honestly, like if I really want to boil it down, I know a lot of people have thought about that trade.
Yeah.
That trade was a timeout for us. And it was just basically, faking an injury, and the clock stopped and gave us a chance to regroup.
Okay.
All right.
And was that because like a pick before that Vincent pick, like somebody got taken that we really liked, and we were like, wait a second, where are we going here?
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
At that point. And sometimes as I get older, I'm 54 now, I just turned 54, and I get murky, things get murky. And so that was a period of time where I don't remember why we had to take the time out.
Yeah.
It was buffalo chicken dip.
It was buffalo chicken.
Yeah, but I know Chad was in the bathroom at the time. So that was a part of it, because when we drafted Flacco, I think Kevin Byrne was unavailable.
He missed it.
And then we had to recreate some things after the fact. That's a true story. That is actually a true story. Be in the book someday. So I was worried about Chad. He didn't look well. and he was, I think he was in the bathroom stall.
Okay.
Yeah, well, if you want to make sure that when that pick goes down in history, that you want to have that documented. So
Well, Chad's got to be there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
For sure.
I'm curious. You mentioned someone asked you after the draft about drafting a quarterback on day 3, and whether you were interested. And you said that you thought about it. There was a guy that you liked. Of course, a couple of quarterbacks went in the division. Shedeur Sanders went to the Browns. Will Howard went to the Steelers on day 3. I'm curious, are you willing to share who you were thinking about drafting at quarterback as a backup on day 3?
I mean, I think there was a couple guys we liked. One guy in particular that we liked on day 3. I mean, you could go back and you could look at it and see all those guys that were drafted on day 3, and then, try to figure it out. But there was definitely one guy that we thought was kind of interesting as a day 3 pick, and we talked about it, and he got picked. But again, it would have been a good prospect for us to develop. We still believe Devin's going to really make a jump this year, but again, people don't necessarily think this all the time, but we really do try to draft best available player, and we rank the players and we work off that list. And had this quarterback been there, then we might have picked him.
Right, Tyler Loop. We know that Randy Brown went on a scouting mission. He was all over the place drafting or scouting these kickers. How much did you hear about Tyler from Randy? Like, was he in your office a lot, giving you the full rundown, the full breakdown on the kickers?
Well, fortunately, because of all the construction going on in the building right now, my office was really, really hard to get to.
Did you have the earplugs in when Randy came?
Well, my office was just like really, 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 really hard to find.
Yeah.
You got to put a hard hat on.
It's like Ark of the Covenant hard to find, but it reminded me though, I will say years ago, this is what these kicking coaches do.
Yeah.
They go on a tour basically, and they just evaluate all these kickers, and they want to watch them live if they can, and that's just what Randy did. He went all over the country looking at these guys. But it reminded me in some ways, although I'll tell you a great kind of throwback story that people don't know. So years ago, back in, I think it was 2006, one of my early drafts, and we were looking for a punter. And we had this coach, Frank Gans. We call him Machine Gun Gans. And I called Frank down, Frankie Gans. I said, hey, coach, we got to find a punter. So I said, just go out and scout and do whatever you got to do, but I'm going to ask you in April who the best guy is and let me know. And there were a bunch of guys, like the combine, they had all these punters at the combine, and I'm at the workout, and I'm watching all these guys boom the ball. And so Frank comes back in April, and he's like, hey, I got the guy. And I'm thinking, okay, well, who is it? And he goes, well, it's a non-combine guy. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's 20 punters at the combine, and you're telling me that this is a non-combine guy? He goes, yeah, he was a linebacker. And I'm like, what's his name? He said, Sam Cook.
No.
He goes, he's the best one. And I'm like, Frank, this is kind of important. You're telling me that this is the best one. And he's like, I'm telling you, this guy is the best punter in the draft. And I go, he didn't even freaking get invited to the combine.
Right.
At Nebraska. It's not like he's at Mankato State.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm telling you, he's the best one. And we took him. What was it, a 6th-round pick? I think it was. He kicked for us for how many years? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. Decade plus
years,
15 years,
right?
whatever.
15, 16
right.
years, whatever it is. So I tell you that story because kicking it's an aspect of scouting that I will never truly understand or appreciate. I think Randy Brown does a great job. I know he does. And I'm going to usually defer to the coach, which I won't really do at any other position.
Right.
I'm not going to just say, okay, we're drafting this guy. I'm going to watch him, and I'm going to form an opinion. It's just more challenging for me to form an opinion of a punter or a kicker, right? And so Randy said this was the best guy. and not only I think this is the best guy, I think this is the best guy over the last 3 or 4 years at least. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And he ended up being the highest rated guy in the 6th round when we picked.
Interesting. I'm curious, you talked a good amount coming into the draft about running back and the possibility of taking a running back. And I don't know if that was all smoke screens, but you fooled me because I was like, they keep mentioning running back here. And even though it's not a need on paper, it reminded me of when you took Dobbins, and it wasn't a need that year necessarily, but you ended up taking him. So I was like, they're going to take a running back at some point, and
you were saying early.
I thought early. I thought
this guy was saying early.
I thought maybe it could be in like the 2nd round, like it was with Dobbins. Were there any running backs that you consider? Was that something that you were hoping to do? What was your view of the running back position?
Well, we tried. I channeled my inner Mike Ditka. We offered every draft pick this year and all of our draft picks next year to go up to take Ginty. And we just couldn't find a trade partner.
No one would do it, huh?
I thought maybe there was a chance we could get up to 3, but they didn't want to do it.
20 picks wasn't enough.
Quite a leap.
They didn't want to do it. But no, I think this was a really, really good draft class for running backs. In saying that, as we look at our position group, we're pretty blessed. I mean, we've got, I think a great room. We've got 4 deep that we feel really, really strong about. And I think Rasheen last year, he hasn't really shown people what we think he can do. He's an explosive running back. And, Keaton coming off an injury, Justice Hill, one of the probably most unsung players on our team. And then, of course, Derrick Henry, who had an elite season last year. So we feel blessed to have like 4 backs that we feel like can go in and play extremely well, given the chance. Not to say we wouldn't have taken him back. It just had to be a situation where for us the value was too good to pass up. In other words, we're not looking at a chalk player. We're not looking at, oh yeah, this is a good 2nd round pick. We're looking at, oh my God, we got to take this guy. He's too good for us to pass up on. And it just didn't really materialize that way based on which players were on the board when we picked.
Another just loaded room on this offense is a tight end room. And there's, of course, a lot of pre-draft buzz about Mark Andrews and the possibility of a trade there potentially. Did any team call us asking about Mark?
During the draft, we never really had those discussions. The phone never really rang. Honestly, Mark is a great player.
Yeah.
And we're not really in the business of letting our great players leave unless we're going to get a lot for them, because our best team is with Mark Andrews on it. Let's face it. Our best chance to win a Super Bowl is with Mark Andrews on the team. And so I think teams knew that. We had, some discussion potentially early on in the process, going back in March. And it just became apparent to me that I value Mark more than anybody else. We value Mark more than most teams, anybody else. And so based on that, we're going to keep our best players. And so, it was a really good tight end draft class this year. I think 5 or 6 guys that watching these guys, whether it's, Loveland or Warren or Arroyo or Taylor. I thought the Fanning kid, Ferguson. You got 6 tight ends that really have a chance to contribute quickly. We would have considered those guys for sure, and just had 4 tight ends on the roster.
Well, and you have 3 going into contract years this year,
so we would have easily taken a tight end.
Right.
The way that those guys came off the board, I think maybe 5 of those guys came off the board, maybe before we picked in the 2nd round.
Yeah.
Right? Fannin might have been the last guy standing, and he got picked pretty quick too. So, I think the league values tight ends. We're blessed that we have some good tight ends. Definitely something that we have to work on in the short term and in the long term, given that they're all free agents. But I think right now we have an abundance of riches at both running back and tight end. We're going to use those guys.
Well, the takeaway here is, we could have taken a running back, a tight end. You talked about you want a big run-stuffing defense attack. We need more picks, right? We had 11. We need more picks, more appetizers. That's the solution.
Yeah, I really wanted the bang bang shrimp, and we couldn't do it.
Oh, bang bang shrimp is fire.
Yeah.
You got to get the bang bang shrimp.
Last question that I have, Eric, is the heavy lifting of the offseason's done. You made these 11 picks in free agency. You keep Ronnie. You bring in DeAndre Hopkins. And so, like, the roster is pretty much set going into this season for the most part. And this team is so close. It's been right there. And the expectation, I'm sure, is that this team is going to be right there back in that mix again this year. Like, what is your view of this team and what it can do going into this season?
Well, I think it's a good team. I like the depth that we have. Last year we took on some water with our depth, and I think, we lost a lot of good players last year in free agency. Mm-hmm. And started out 0-2, came back and played great football, had a great season, proud of the team. I think this team is really poised, and we're strong at most position groups now. There's a couple things we want to do between now and probably when we break, before camp. A couple additions, maybe a couple signings, a couple things we can do to make our team better. But, I think in the short term this year, we are, positioned extremely well. Now, I think looking out, we've got some players that we want to extend. We should have a nice amount of draft picks next year. We didn't even talk about the other trade that we made with the Jets, where we gave up.
Got a pick next year.
We went back 10 spots and got their 5th for our 6th. Like, that's an opportunity, I think, for us to gain a lot of spots in the draft next year. I think right now, if you assume that we maybe get 2 fifth-round comp picks potentially for guys that we lost this year, McCary and Stevens. Yep. If we do, and given that Jets trade, we should have 4 fifth-round picks, which is nice. And, maybe an opportunity for us to corner the 5th round, which we haven't. We've
done the 4th and the 6th.
Yeah, maybe there's going to be a chance for us if we can get a couple more 5th-round picks and just make that our round next year.
Yeah,
would be kind of cool to do. But that's what we're focused on right now, and we're excited about it. And I think the team looks strong, but it never ends. This is a competitive business, and if you ever get to the point where you think you're set, you're going to fail. So for us, it's all about challenging ourselves, looking at the short term challenges associated with that, but also the long term. What do we have to accomplish to make the long term look better? Mm-hmm. And we'll work on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate it, and congrats on another successful draft.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. You're listening to the Lounge Podcast, and we are coming to you from the SeatGeek studio. We want to mention our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. They are an official sports betting partner of the Baltimore Ravens. DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. So big thanks to Eric DeCosta for joining us on the podcast. It's one of my favorite episodes of the year, every single year, and of course it did not disappoint. I will say, for longtime listeners and viewers of the Lounge, Eric has a track record of pulling off some kind of prank, some kind of lie story whenever he comes on the pod. Both of us had our antennas up the entire time.
Well, I felt myself, I thought that the whole Sam Cooke story,
you thought it was going down that path?
At first, I was just, I was like, no way. And then the alarm bell started going off. I was like, wait, is this whole story fake?
Yeah.
But I don't think it was.
I think that was real. I mean, we actually took Sam Cooke.
Right. Now the whole backstory behind it.
Right.
But I think that was all real. I think that was all. But my radar was up.
We were definitely alert to the potential this year. So I don't think that any of those stories were fake, but I also can never be certain.
The giraffe really was.
He really was conducting interviews.
Yeah, conducting interviews. So that was real.
Yeah.
Check it.
Yeah. But it was a really good conversation with him. I mean, I think that as I've talked with him, we had a chance earlier this week to go through a film session with Joey Cleary and Andrew Raphael, Ravens scouts. And I just think that overall, like, I feel even better about this class, and you can tell the excitement that the Ravens have about this group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the facts of the matter are we've had some awesome draft classes here, and Ozzie Newsome went out in a blaze of glory in his last year making the picks with Lamar Jackson. That 2018 class was awesome. And Eric DeCosta, before the draft, I was every year I go and I kind of rank the draft classes, and the
best in Ravens history.
The best in Ravens history, all of the Ravens draft classes, and rank them. And I'll tell you, there's been a couple now in Eric DeCosta's tenure as GM that are right up there near the top.
Yeah.
I mean, that 2022 class, that 2020 class, awesome classes. And then these most recent ones, it's too early to say. You need to give a draft class a little bit of time, but I think that this year's class, when all is said and done, and I'm going back 3-4 years from now and saying, where does this one rank?
I think it's gonna be high.
You know how much I love that Malachi Starks pick.
Yeah.
So it got off to a great start.
Well, look, I always just find it interesting hearing process, and when they talk about why they kept all 11 picks and the percentages of hit rate that they're going to have, and of course you try to be better than that, but they're looking at the averages on those things, and I just think that all of that is interesting perspective, and it gives you an understanding of why the Ravens do what they do. And I think that Eric is very process driven and very analytical in his approach, not just from a standpoint of what does the number say, but wants to be look at things from a holistic view and make a sound decision with every pick and every strategy decision. And I think you see that. And I think that comes across when he sits down with us. And I think that's always enlightening.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for listening. As always, leave a rating and review. You can email us at thelounge@ravens.nfl.net. And these rookies will be on campus here very soon, coming in for rookie minicamp this weekend. We'll have all the coverage, first impressions. We'll have the photos, the videos, the social media clips. Make sure you tune in for that this weekend as we get our first taste of what this draft class is going to bring. Thanks for listening. We'll be back early next week with our impressions from rookie minicamp.